All right. So we're diving into a language today that's, how do I even put this? Let's just say it makes other languages look kind of plain. Yeah, we're talking Navajo today.
It's definitely one of a kind.
You brought a whole stack of articles and research, so I'm ready to get lost in it.
Yeah.
From what I've skimmed, this isn't just about grammar tables, right? This is about code talkers, cultural survival, a whole different way of seeing things. Are you ready to get our minds blown by linguistics?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're in for a wild ride, especially with a language like Navajo, or, well, Diné-Bizad, as its speakers call it. The resilience of this language is astounding.
Resilience. Okay, I like the sound of that already. So before we get into all that, give me the basics. Where is it mainly spoken? How many people are keeping this amazing language alive?
Well, imagine this. It's actually the most spoken Native American language north of that Mexico-U.S. border, which is pretty incredible in itself. Around 170,000 speakers, mostly in the southwestern U.S.
Wow, that's more than I would have guessed, honestly.
Right. And the heartland is the Navajo Nation, of course. But even with those numbers, the fact that it survived, well, that's a story in itself.
All right, you've hooked me. But before we get to the why of it all, give me the what. Linguistically speaking, what are we dealing with here?
It's part of the Southern Athabascan family, which might not tell you much right off the bat.
Unless you're a language nerd, yeah.
Exactly. But think of it like this. It's distantly related to languages all the way up in Alaska, Canada. Talk about a family spread out. But Navajo itself, it's got this crazy complex grammar. It's what we call agglutinative.
Agglutinin. Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me. Even I, lover of words that I am, don't know that one.
Okay, so picture this. In English, we add separate words to make things more specific, right? Like walk quickly, long stick, and so on. In Navajo, they jam all that meaning to the verb itself.
So instead of walk, it's more like walking quickly towards you while carrying something long. All in one word.
You got it. Their verbs are famous for being action-packed. And it means that word order is way more flexible than in English, which I'm sure makes it a fun one to learn. Plus, it's tonal.
Tonal? Wait, like how I change my voice when I'm being sarcastic?
Kinda. But in Navajo, changing the pitch of your voice actually changed the meaning of the word itself.
Okay, my brain is already starting to hurt trying to picture a casual conversation in this language, which, speaking of, makes those World War II code talkers even more incredible. Didn't we have something about them in this stack of research?
We sure did. Navajo men, right, recruited by the U.S. military during the war, used their language to make a code that the enemy just couldn't crack.
It's genius. We're talking about the Iron Fish guys, right?
Exactly. Using Iron Fish for submarine, pure genius, right? And they didn't stop there.
Oh, there's more. What else did they come up with?
Well, for example, instead of directly translating dive bomber, they used chicken hawk. It referred to how the bird hunts. So clever.
Wow, talk about quick thinking.
Right. And get this, battleship became floating fortress. 2 words, but such a powerful image. Their code wasn't just swapping words, it was about using the way Navajo naturally describes things.
That's incredible, but it makes you think, here they are on the battlefield, using their language to literally save lives. Must have been a point of serious pride. But also back home, things weren't so simple for Native American identities, were they?
You hit the nail on the head. While these guys were off being heroes, back home, Navajo, along with a lot of native languages, was facing a whole different battle.
You're talking about the boarding schools, right? That's a tough subject.
Yeah, it's a dark part of history, no way around it. These schools, any government run, their goal was to basically force Native American kids to assimilate.
Assimilate, meaning forget their language, forget their culture, and become...
Exactly. Kids taken from their families, punished for speaking their own languages. It's all about stripping away their identities.
It breaks your heart, you know? It makes the code talker's story even more, I don't know, bittersweet, you know? Using their language to protect a country that was trying to erase it at the same time.
It's definitely a complex story, full of contradictions, but it shows how strong the Navajo people are. Even with everything thrown at them, they held onto their language, passing it down through generations.
Okay, before I get too down in the dumps here, remind me, we're not just talking about a language barely holding on, are we? There's a comeback happening, right?
A comeback, absolutely. What's amazing is that Navajo isn't just surviving, it's having a real revival. People are recognizing how important it is, and they're bringing it back in a big way.
It's exciting to think about, isn't it? And I'm thinking back to those articles about language immersion programs. They're really taking things to a whole new level, yeah.
For sure. I mean, we're talking about full immersion from the time kids start preschool all the way up to college.
Seriously, I had no idea it went that far.
Oh, yeah. Diné College, for example, they even have a whole associate degree in Navajo.
That's incredible.
It is. And it's more than just teaching the language itself. It's about revitalizing the entire culture that comes with it.
Right. Like we were saying before, language isn't just words on a page. It's a way of seeing the world, understanding your place in it. And if you mess with a culture's way of communicating, well,
Yeah,
what happens to that whole worldview?
exactly. And that's what makes these programs so important. They're not just teaching words and grammar, they're breathing life back into a whole way of thinking.
You know, one thing that really stuck with me from the research was the role of storytelling in Navajo culture.
Hmm.
It's such a big part of who they are. Is there a connection there with the language itself?
Absolutely. Navajo is like it's tailor-made for oral traditions. For example, did you know they have different verb forms for talking about something that happened to you personally versus something you heard about from someone else?
Wow, seriously?
Yeah. So even the grammar itself emphasizes the importance of sharing stories, keeping those connections alive.
That's amazing.
And it goes even deeper than that. Navajo stories, they're so connected to the land, full of these really vivid descriptions of nature, the animals, the whole environment around them.
I'm starting to understand why people say that learning Navajo can almost feel like you're rewiring your brain. Like it makes you pay attention to things you never would have noticed before.
That's a great way to put it. The way Navajo makes you think about spatial relationships, how specific you have to be about even simple actions, it can really change your whole perspective.
Okay, I have to ask. We've talked about how incredible and complex this language is. But are there any, common pitfalls for people trying to learn it? Things that English speakers just trip over every time?
One that always comes up is the concept of animacy.
Animacy.
Yeah, basically, in Navajo, you use different verbs depending on whether you're talking about something that's alive or something that's inanimate. And it's not always obvious to an English speaker which verb is right.
Okay, I kind of get it. But I can also see how that would lead to some pretty awkward conversations for someone who's still learning.
Definitely a recipe for some misunderstandings, for sure.
You know, it's funny. We've talked so much about verbs and grammar and all that, but we haven't even gotten into the actual words themselves, the vocabulary. Did Navajo borrow a lot from other languages, or is it more, I don't know, homegrown?
That's one of the most fascinating things about Navajo, actually. It's incredibly resistant to borrowing words,
Mm-hmm.
especially compared to a lot of other languages.
Really? Even with all the influence of Spanish and English over the years, you'd think there'd be more crossover.
You'd think so, right? But nope, Navajo has this amazing ability to adapt to new concepts without sacrificing its own linguistic roots.
So what do they do then when they encounter a completely new word, like computer, internet? Those weren't exactly lying around a few centuries ago.
You're right about that. Instead of just taking the English word as is, Navajo speakers will often create these descriptive phrases or combine existing words in really creative ways.
So it's like they're solving a puzzle, trying to find a way to fit this new piece of information into their existing linguistic framework.
That's a great way to put it. And it really highlights how adaptable and creative the language itself is.
Speaking of creative, you mentioned earlier that even the name Navajo itself is something people have been discussing more and more. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's an important conversation to have. You see, Navajo, as widespread as it is actually an exonym. It's a name given to them by outsiders.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. But remind me again, what term do the Navajo people actually use for themselves? And why is that difference so important?
The name they use is Diné. It means the people. And their language is often called Diné Bizad, which literally means the people's language.
The people's language, it's beautiful.
It is. So it's not that Navajo is wrong, exactly, but using Diné Bizad, it shows respect for how they see themselves, their right to define their own identity.
It's true, and it makes you realize language and identity are so closely intertwined, especially for indigenous communities who have fought so hard to have their voices heard, their stories told in their own way. You know, it really makes you think, just one word, but it can mean so much. Language isn't just about dictionaries and grammar rules, is it? It's about giving people the power to tell their own stories, their own way.
Absolutely. And those stories, they have the power to change how we see the world.
Okay, last question, and I'm going to get a little philosophical here, bear with me. We've talked about how beautiful, how resilient, how downright mind-bending Navajo is. But in a world where, let's be honest, a few languages kind of run the show, why does it even matter? Why keep a language like Navajo alive? Especially if most people might never even meet someone who speaks it. What's the point?
That's a big question. And it gets to the heart of why diversity matters in all its forms, right? It's easy to think, oh, wouldn't it be simpler if everyone just spoke the same language? But simpler doesn't always mean better. Each language, especially one as unique as Navajo, it's like a treasure chest of knowledge, a whole different way of looking at things.
So we're losing, what, like a set of tools, ways of thinking, problem solving every time a language disappears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about the big problems we're facing today, right? Climate change, social justice, technology changing faster than we can keep up. What if the key to some of those problems, what if a new way of thinking about them is hidden within a language like Navajo? A language that's been adapting to a challenging environment, emphasizing living in harmony with nature for centuries. Lose the language, maybe we lose those insights too.
It's like each language is its own operating system for the human brain, almost. More diversity in those systems, more ways of looking at things, means more chances to solve problems in new ways.
That's a great way to put it. And Navajo, with its focus on spatial relationships, that verb system that makes you pay attention to every little detail, who knows what kind of insights it could offer? Programming, design, maybe even architecture. A whole world of knowledge just waiting to be explored.
You know, we talk about finding inspiration in nature, right? Using what we see in the natural world to solve human problems. Maybe it's time we started thinking about language that way too, like as a source of untapped potential, a whole well of creativity just waiting to be tapped.
Oh, that's a powerful thought.
It really is. We started out curious about the Navajo language, but I'm walking away from this with a whole new appreciation for language itself, how it connects to culture, to identity, even to the future of how we think and create. If learning a new language is like opening a door to a whole new world, then keeping languages alive, it's like keeping those doors open for everyone. Thanks for taking this journey of linguistic exploration with us. Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious.